I've been tracking technology progressions for over 30 years. I realized actually in 1981 that the key to being successful as an inventor was timing. You had to be in the right place with the right idea at the right time. So the inventors and entrepreneurs whose names you recognize, like my new boss, Larry Page, actually my first boss, they were in the right place at the right time. In fact, I anticipated that. In the early 80s, I saw the ARPANET progressing exponentially, connected 1,000 scientists, and then 2,000, and then 4,000, created by the Department of Defense. I did the math and said, well, this is going to be a World Wide Web connecting hundreds of millions of people to each other and to vast knowledge resources by the late 1990s. People thought that was ridiculous when the entire defense budget could only tie together 2,000 scientists. But that is what happened. That is the power of exponential growth. And we won't be able to find any information because there's going to be too much information on the web, so we'll need search engines. And the computational and communication resources to create a search engine will be in place by that time. Now, not everything is predictable. The fact that it'd be these couple of kids in the Stanford dorm who would take over the world of search, that was not predictable. I wouldn't have to work very hard today if I had predicted that. But I do want to actually share with you what I do believe is very predictable, because I started with the common wisdom in 1981 that you cannot predict the future. But I thought, being an engineer, if I gathered enough data, if I used the right visualization tools, if I squinted at the visualization, maybe I could make some educated guesses. And I made a surprising discovery. Those of you who heard Peter's presentation yesterday will appreciate the insights that he talked about. The price, performance, and capacity of information technology, also its size, is amazingly predictable, despite the vagaries of human history. And what's predictable is that it progresses in an exponential manner. And another important observation is that's not intuitive. If you wonder why do we have a brain, it's to make predictions about the future. So when we were walking through the fields 1,000 years ago, we'd kind of look up and go, okay, that animal's going that way. I'm coming up the path this way. We're going to meet at that rock. That's maybe not a good idea. I'm going to take a different path. That became hardwired in our brains. We didn't expect that animal to speed up as it went along. We made a linear prediction of the future. That is our intuition about the future. The primary difference between myself and my critics is we're looking at the same world. We have pretty much consistent perceptions about what that means. They then just apply their linear intuition about what will happen, even unsaid. It's just so obvious that things will progress in a linear manner. For example, halfway through the Genome Project, 7 years into this 15-year project, 1% had been collected. So mainstream critics, including a Nobel Prize winner, said, well, I told you this wasn't going to work. Here you are, 7 years, 1%. It's going to take 700 years, just like we said. My reaction was, oh, we're at 1%. We're almost done, because 1% is only 7 doublings from 100%. It had been doubling every year. There are reasons to expect that to continue. Indeed, it finished 7 years later. And every other aspect of biology has been scaling up in an exponential manner. But that's not intuitive. And as I think this audience readily appreciates, there's a profound difference between our linear intuition and the exponential reality. Not every technology progresses exponentially. It's specifically information technologies, their price, performance, and capacity progresses in an exponential manner. And a linear progression is 1, 2, 3. An exponential progression is 1, 2, 4. Doesn't sound that different. In fact, they don't look that different at first. But by the time you get to step 30, the linear progression, that's our intuition, is at 30. The exponential progression is at 1 billion. At step 40, it's at 1 trillion. And this is not an idle speculation about the future. I mean, this little computer is several billion times more powerful per dollar than the computer I used at MIT, across the river here, when I was an undergraduate. I went to MIT because MIT was so advanced in the late 1960s that it actually had a computer. And you needed influence to get more than a few seconds of time each day. thousands of us shared that computer. It took up a floor of a building. This is 100,000 times smaller. We have an exponential progression in size. We're shrinking both electronic and mechanical technology at a rate of 100 in 3D volume per decade. And it's several billion times more powerful. It's several thousand times more capable, several million times less expensive. There's a several billion-fold increase in price performance. We'll do both of those things again in the next 25 years. This will have computational and communication robotic devices the size of blood cells. Then we'll really have a deeply interconnected Internet of everything. There'll be, and it'll again be a billion times more powerful in price performance. So I'll talk somewhat about the implications of all that. These are the implications. Any questions on any of this? All right.
You've talked about interplanetary travel and sustainable energy and the vehicles a little bit. What would you want things to look like in 5 to 10 years associated with energy and with autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles?
Well, I think things are going to be, they're going to grow exponentially. So there's a big difference between 5 and 10 years. You know, my guess is, yeah, probably in 10 years, more than a half of new vehicle production is electric in the United States. And China's probably going to be ahead of that because China's been super pro-EV. I don't think a lot of people know this, but China's environmental policies are way ahead of the U.S. Like their mandate for renewable energy far exceeds the U.S. I think sometimes people are under the impression that China is either dragging their feet or somehow behind the U.S. in terms of sustainable energy promotion, but they're by far the most aggressive on Earth. It's crazy. I mean, in fact, a coalition of Chinese car manufacturers just wrote the Chinese government to beg for them to slow down the mandate. Because it's too much. They need to make 8% electric vehicles, I think, next year or in 2 years or something. They can't physically do it. So China's by far the most aggressive on electric vehicles and solar. But that's a common misperception that they're not. There's one Google search way to figure this out, by the way. It's really pretty easy. So. And in 10 years, man, I think, so half of all production, I think, will be EV. I think almost all cars produced will be autonomous in 10 years. Almost all. It will be rare to find one that is not in 10 years. That's going to be a huge transformation.
I'm really very close to the cutting edge in AI. And it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows. And the rate of improvement is exponential. You can see this in things like AlphaGo, which went from, in the span of maybe 6 to 9 months, it went from being unable to beat even a reasonably good Go player to then beating the European world champion, who was ranked 600, then beating Lee Sedol 4-5. Who had been world champion for many years, then beating the current world champion, then beating everyone while playing simultaneously. Then there was AlphaZero, which crushed AlphaGo 100-0. And AlphaZero just learned by playing itself, and it can play basically any game that you put the rules in for. Whatever rules you give it, literally read the rules, play the game, and be superhuman for any game. Nobody expected that rate of improvement. If you ask those same experts who think AI is not progressing at the rate that I'm saying, I think you will find that their predictions for things like Go and other AI advancements have their batting average is quite weak. It's not good. We'll see this also with self-driving. I think probably by end of next year, self-driving will encompass essentially all modes of driving and be at least 100 to 200% safer than a person by the end of next year. We're talking like maybe 18 months from now. NHTSA did a study on Tesla's Autopilot version 1, which is relatively primitive, and found that it was a 45% reduction in highway accidents. And that's despite Autopilot 1 being just version 1. Version 2, I think, will be at least 2 or 3 times better. That's the current version that's running right now. So the rate of improvement is really dramatic. We have to figure out some way to ensure that the advent of digital superintelligence is one which is symbiotic with humanity.
In the year 2012, 3 things came together which ignited the modern Big Bang of AI. And those 3 things was created as a result of a young researcher whose name is Alex Krizhevsky at the University of Toronto, experimenting with deep neural nets running on a GPU, and he submitted his results to the ImageNet contest, the CVPR contest. And as a result, he won the Computer Vision Image Recognition Contest of 2012. The achievement is utterly unbelievable. And it's utterly unbelievable because he has no special training in computer vision. And in one single stroke, he was able to defeat decades of computer vision experts with image recognition, using computers to recognize images. The network is called AlexNet. By today's standards, it is absolutely tiny. However, in year 2012, it was the single best computer vision algorithm the world has ever seen. Now, it uses a technology called deep learning. And deep learning is something that almost everybody has heard about since. In the last 5 years, it has swept the computer industry. Deep learning has been invented decades ago, in fact. However, it has one enormous handicap. Its handicap is that it requires an enormous amount of data to train the network. And it's a large network with an enormous amount of data to train, and as a result, it needed supercomputers with weeks and weeks of computation time in order to train and develop that software. It has prohibited deep learning from becoming effective until the advent of the GPU. The GPU discovered, researchers all over the world discovered around that time, that using NVIDIA CUDA GPU could train their deep neural nets in a very short period of time. A short period of time in 2012 was about a week's time. Literally, a computer would develop software by itself, running calculations after calculations after calculations for 1 week's time. The final network was the best computer image recognition software the world had ever seen. The effectiveness of deep learning was realized. The power of deep learning is that the more data you give it, the greater the network, and the greater the computational capability, the greater the effectiveness. Now that we realize the power of deep learning, we can invest and build ever more complex networks, gather more data, and build ever faster supercomputers. That the three combination, deep networks, larger networks, more data, and more compute, the combination triggered and ignited the Big Bang of modern AI.